This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Claudia Cohl was the editor-in-chief of Family Computing magazine for its entire run. Published by Scholastic, the magazine ran for 49 issues from September 1983 through September 1987. Then it published 11 more issues through August 1988 as Family and Home Office Computing. Finally, it was rebranded Home Office Computing. Claudia remained editor there almost the entire time until a new division was formed at Scholastic, and she moved to the professional publishing department to focus on magazines for teachers. In a 1983 New York Times article, Children's Magazine for a Computer Age, Claudia is quoted, "Our magazine is primarily for parents. Parents feel confused about computers and software, and they feel they have no place to turn. We think parents will be using our magazine themselves or with their kids. Children will be picking up the magazine too." Claudia was also editor-in-chief of K-Power magazine, a computer magazine for kids, running from February 1984 through November-December of that year, after which it was merged with Family Computing. Our interview took place in two portions, on June 29, 2018, and December 11, 2019.
I remember meeting Jack Trammell.
Oh yeah? Tell me.
Well, you know, he was an escapee from Nazi Germany, really.
Right, yeah.
He was not your typical computer person.
No, nothing about him, I think, was the usual business sort of computer business guy.
No.
So under what circumstances did you meet him?
Well, just because I was doing the magazine, I met everybody. I mean, I was in an amazing spot, you know, at the beginning. So, you know, I would go to a party and talk to Bill Gates, and it was exciting times. And actually, I became friendly with one of the top PR people there, and they would come to New York, and we'd all go out. And I remember I said to somebody, "What does he want?" And the answer was, "Everything."
He being who?
Gates.
Gates? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, he got it. He succeeded in that, I think.
Wasn't all of it. You know, and here he's like this really studious person with his piles of books, but there was method to his madness.
So what was your impression of Jack Trammell?
Well, he was just so atypical. You know, I found it fascinating that he got into that field, and I guess when I think back upon it, it was probably mostly as a business venture more than anything. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
you know,
he was not there for the love of technology, I think. It was just he wanted to...
It was atypical.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to put him down. I was just saying to differentiate between, you know, Bill Gates or anybody else.
All right, so speaking of atypical things, I feel like Family Computing was an atypical computer magazine.
And I was atypical.
And I think you were an atypical editor, so I would like to talk about that. But I would like to start before that. If you can give me some prehistory, how you, just education, how you got hired by Scholastic, just kind of warm me up, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. Grew up torn between the middle-class Jewish, wasn't all Jewish, but kids, and being very involved in, my dad had a grocery store, and that's where I really liked to be. And he would donate everything to the sisterhood and the kids' stuff at the church. And here we went to church. My father spoke very broken English, and the congregation would yell, "Tell it, Brother Isaac, tell it." And I had amazing experiences there, just amazing. You know, I could still quote the prices of 5 pounds of sugar and 3 pounds of greens, and, you know, from the 50s and early 50s. When I was 3, he put me to work putting cans on the shelf, and then when I could make numbers, I had to write prices, and then I learned to work the cash register and
Nice.
the whole thing, and I loved it. I absolutely loved being there more than shopping. And he used to take me to baseball games. That was the other thing. So
What was your team?
Tigers.
Okay.
Love those Tigers.
Detroit Tigers. So how did you end up in New York?
I used to sit in the library and look at the New Yorker, and I knew my mother they couldn't believe that I did this. You know, my parents said they went to the airport all the time thinking I'd be on a plane. That's not true, of course. But I just dreamt of the day I could go, and I loved New York. I mean, it was, and I thought, I'll be in New York for 2 years. So that was 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been here ever since. You know, it's like I feel like I have to touch the sidewalk and breathe the air. So my grandmother's the only one. In her senility, she said, you know, when I was young, I went to New York. There's what to like in New York. Anyway, my mother found it like a 3-ring circus. That's how she described it. You never knew where to look.
Mm-hmm.
Too much.
That's
and my father would say, there's more cars in New York than there are people in Detroit. So it was interesting. I'm very lucky. I mean, I look at members of my family now, these kids, and you know, they go to the best schools, and they don't even have loans. Their parents planned it from their birth. So, you know, they're in graduate school, loan free, and you know, traveling to work is a hardship. Something, you know, I wouldn't trade a minute of what I went through. Not a minute. You know, I lived on bank loans. I had a bed where the one leg collapsed. I remember having to go someplace and counting pennies. You know, the subway was 15 cents, and I went through all my pockets and purses, and I had 16 cents, and I went into the subway with my extra penny, and the gum machine worked. Well, so anyway, it was wonderful. It was, I loved every minute. So what happened was no one would hire me because I'd been a teacher. So I taught school just long enough to get a loan from the Detroit Teachers Credit Union to move to New York. And everyone thought that I was just going to take a summer job and then go back and teach, because why would I take a job for so little money? They just didn't get it. So in August, I finally got this job working for people who had been educators, and Grolier hired them to turn the Book of Knowledge from a rainy day book into a real alphabetized children's encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to type, and you had carbons then, 6 copies. And somebody said to me, I bought a book, How to Type in 10 Easy Lessons. I only got to lesson 3 when I was interviewed. And someone said, just don't do strikeover. So I got so tired of erasing. And this woman had a granddaughter named Claudia. And then I said to her, what are you looking for? And she said, I'm looking for someone bright. Well, I was staying in an apartment that belonged to somebody who was 23 years old teaching at Barnard, and someone else who was in law school. And they had all these, like, brilliant friends. And they would all say, he's terribly bright. So she said she was looking for someone bright. And I said, bright. I guess you could call me bright. Maybe not terribly bright. And she laughed and hired me. And after a very short time, she hired another assistant. And I got to do editing. I loved it. You know, I had always loved it. I had done well. I had a teacher in high school who hated me, but she did the most amazing thing. She would I'll never forget this. She read the editorial from the Detroit Free Press, I believe it was, called "Ignorance is worst among the arrogance is worst among the ignorant."
Mm-hmm.
And we had to write it, and then you got the paper back, and there would be like 3 check marks on it, and you'd have to rewrite it, figure out what the 3 check marks referred to, and you would rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and it was like the best preparation for editing. But when I had her in the 9th grade, and I had a lot of problems adjusting, and then in the 12th grade I had adjusted, and I walked in and she said, "Oh, the end of a long worm is back." And there was nothing I could do that would make her give me an A, even though I had an A on just everything I did. She wouldn't let me see my final. But it's okay. I learned from her. I don't think she had any idea who I was, and I don't think I had the ability to really reveal who I was to anybody in those days. I think it was all just trying to cover up. And in those days, the really, really rich kids went to public schools. I only had one acquaintance who went to private school. That was the oddity. These kids lived in mansions, and it was, they had 63 cashmere sweaters, blah, 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 blah. So it was a mix. And then there was a group of black people who came from the other side of one of the avenues. So it was a very interesting time. I was very lucky and couldn't wait to leave. And, my friends all joined a sorority, which I wouldn't do, which the sorority didn't understand. But, I always wanted to have a wide mix of people in my life.
Mm-hmm. How did you end up at Scholastic?
Okay, so this woman who had the granddaughter named Claudia hired me.
Mm-hmm. And you were editing, what were you editing for her?
The Book of Knowledge, she was
right.
head of social studies, which was like 2/3 of the book. She ended up getting mad at me and firing me, and her boss hired me. And then she went to her boss and said, no, I need her back. It was wonderful. So anyway, I worked there until the project was coming to an end, and then Grolier, which owned it, had a children's trade book division called Franklin Watts, and I went to work there as the social science editor. And Frank Watts was an amazing person, and he would let me do anything. Like there was a book that Langston Hughes was a friend of his, and there were several like single volumes of things relating to black history, and there was one on the Negro in American history. And then Whitney Young, I don't know if you know who that was, from CORE, his wife did a revision of it. And I went to Frank Watts and I said, like one little volume on the history of Negroes in America, and Negroes, that term is passé. Mm-hmm. So he let me do whatever I wanted, and a friend of mine who was African American did an 8-volume series on the history of black people in America. And I did he let me do just a lot of stuff. And then, I can't remember why I left, but I left, and I went to a magazine, my first magazine job, and it was an educational magazine called Teacher, owned by Macmillan. And the guy who became the publisher and I started the same day, never having met. And I used to say to him, Bob, if you had met me, you would have never hired me, and I would have never gone to work for you. He was this drinking too much, bleached blonde, bloated wasp. Mean, horrible guy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I remember one day we went out to lunch, and I said to him, you take people's dignity, and mine's really not available to you, so if you want me to leave, I'll leave. And he apologized. It was amazing. So, anyway, I knew I had to get out of there, and somebody was doing work for Scholastic, and there was this job as the editor of Teacher Magazine. Now, if I had not left Grolier and taken this 1-year position as the editor of the Macmillan magazine, Grolier would have never, Scholastic would have never hired me. But I came there with this title, the editor of Teacher Magazine, and I stayed there for 30 years.
Wow.
And it was an amazing place, just a great, great company. All the other publications and things that Scholastic did were for kids. And I had experience, they had hired me from Teacher Magazine, which was for adults, and I was an early adopter of a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to be the editor-in-chief of what was then Family Computing. That my role was not to be the expert, but to be the reader. And I realized that when I was at Grolier, I used to call myself the fifth grade mind, that if I understood it, they would print it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never to be the expert. And I think that was like, when you get into computers, especially, the people who write about it have to really understand the technology, but they may not be able to express it in ways that ordinary people can understand it. So my role was to write all over everything and to get them to explain it so that I could understand it. And I think it's what set our magazine apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's what attracted, I didn't realize that a lot of people were reading my editorials and they were following the magazine, and I think that's why it was human to not become as computer literate as everybody else. And it really isn't so far from being the surrogate reader of any magazine, that you can't fall into the trap of being the expert if you're really going to reach a novice audience.
Sure.
So it started as Family Computing, and nobody knew what to do with a computer. And there were all these computers, 1K, 2K. There were like a zillion of them. Atari, Commodore, Texas Instruments, and we would have these articles on how to keep track of your pills. We were like scratching to try to find something. And then all these techies would make incredible programs for all the different computers. Like we did a Christmas tree, put it in the window, and we would work all night just doing this magazine. Parents really didn't understand what to do with the computer. So there were all those things, all those formats and the Christmas trees and the counting your pills and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And it was the kids who got it and who ran away with it. And I was thinking about how in the past, the person who would head up something would be the person who had the expertise and the knowledge. And when computers were on the road to becoming ubiquitous, the people who had the real power were the young people who were exploring and understood it. And the old people, it was a different language.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know, we didn't get it. So that's why we started a magazine for kids. That was K-Power.
Right. That was an exciting magazine too. Were you involved? How were you involved with that?
It was under me. I was the editor-in-chief of both magazines.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Or editorial director. I don't know what I was. I was something, but I was the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hired people for that. And then somehow kids got wind of it. And Stuyvesant High School, which is a high school for really bright kids in New York, they started coming to the office And there were a couple of them that we actually hired who tested programs and, you know, were really computer savvy, and they gave us advice. And then friends of theirs would come in, and all they wanted was food and a Coke. You know, they just wanted to hang out.
So hold it.
it
So
was,
all of a sudden, your editorial offices are an after school hangout for high school kids.
yeah, but you see the beauty of it, and nobody knew that I really loved this. Scholastic outgrew its fancy offices. So we moved into something that had been a really funky clothing manufacturing place, and all they did was like paint the walls and put in some temporary cubicles. But we had a great view. We were in a separate building, and we were on our own. It was like we were like the computer industry because we were pioneers too. You know, we didn't have to pay any attention to what was going on in the corporation. And that's why, you know, we started working all night, and all kinds of people would come to our office. I got George Booth, the New Yorker cartoonist, to come in. He had never worked on a computer, and he first turned me down. And then I said to him, well, my life's ambition and dream was to live in a George Booth cartoon, which was totally chaotic, and, you know, people who had stubble and in their underwear and stuff. And he decided he would come and meet me, and came into the office, and he began to work on the computer, creating his cartoons in our office. He would bring his wife, he would bring his daughter. It became a real hangout. Herbie Hancock did an article for us. Robin Williams did an article for us. In K-Power, there was a place that closed recently called CBGB, where all these like hippie guys and stuff hung out, hip kids. And the Ramones were there. So they became friendly with one of the editors, and they would come to the office. And you just never knew who you were going to find. It was really exciting.
Neat.
And the staff was wonderful, and everybody was like so committed. It was terrific. And I had a lot of fan mail about my letters to the editor. I used to get letters about my letters all the time. And it was great. I mean, it was very gratifying. In the midst of it all, my mother had a stroke, talking to me on the phone in Detroit. We were launching the magazine, and I took a TRS 8100, and every Thursday got on an airplane, went to Detroit, and until Sunday worked out of her hospital room.
Wow.
Then came back, worked in the office, and then Thursday late I would leave again for Detroit. And that went on for a few months. But an amazing staff of people kept it going, and they were great. I mean, it was just, I tell you, I went today, shortly before we started talking, and I just did a search and looked up family computing. And I didn't even take any back issues with me or anything. I just thought, well, that was then. And what's going to be next, I don't know. So anyway, there were all these magazines and magazine covers, and I was sort of shocked. I thought, wow.
Well, I hope
we did okay.
Yeah, you did. I hope that you saw that every page of every issue is scanned and viewable online, which are
no.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun to go through.
Anyway, it was a wonderful part of my life. And then I went on to, I can't even remember what I went on to do, something. I started I worked on creating an in-house paper for employees.
Mm-hmm. For Scholastic employees?
And creating a website for employees. And that was fun. And Again, I had some really terrific people. I was very lucky.
Nice.
I hired well.
Hmm. Yeah.
I hired so well, if I do say so myself, that I still have dinner regularly with two people who were my assistants, who then have gone on to do other things. I had dinner the other night with someone who I'd hired right out of college, who went on to do great things, Bernadette Gray. And actually, Dick Robinson, the president of Scholastic, said I hired better than anybody, which I think is like a great achievement. I really feel odd sort of tooting my own horn like this. But I loved it. I loved working with people, and I loved trying to find the right people for the right job. And Scholastic was a great home.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Today, I think I probably wouldn't even get into college. I think the world is so much tougher.
Mm-hmm.
And, I say that all the time. I don't know if I'd get into college, and I certainly don't think I could hold down the jobs I held down. When I went into publishing, there were people you had to talk to before noon. Because at noon, they left for their 3-martini lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And they either came back very happy or they didn't come back.
Right.
And nobody could do that today.
So you said before that you didn't know anything about computers, and I just think that's fascinating to be the person who's an editor-in-chief of a computer magazine for 64 issues.
I became interested, and I bought a computer early on. The company did a very unusual thing. Dick Robinson, maybe it was my mother's. No, it was before that I had to buy I bought the TRS-80. But Dick Robinson, the president of Scholastic, was really a visionary, and he said computers are really going to change our lives. And he gave everyone, at the time, the computers were very inexpensive, and he gave everybody an allowance of, I think it was like up to $300 to buy a computer. So you could get like a Commodore or TRS-80 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had a computer, you could buy a printer. I think I already had my Apple. So I bought either a printer or a modem. And that was really ahead of his time. He saw that happening. I have no idea how Scholastic ended up in the world of computers, because I don't think there's much success in the history of a print publisher making the transition into technology.
Yeah.
I think the successes are all startups.
It sounds like Family Computing was the magazine that was for grown-ups who are trying to figure out computers, and K-Power was the magazine for the kids who had already figured out computers. Is that right?
Yes. It started out that it was supposed to be for the whole family, but the distinction between the two groups came out very soon.
Mm-hmm. But K-Power only published 8 issues before getting folded back into Family Computing.
That was monetary, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can't remember completely. And maybe it was to increase the advertising revenue, so
sure.
that it became Family Computing and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember.
So I'd like to get back to the it sounds like the mayhem in your office about having kids showing up just to hang out or to play games. Tell me about how that played out, please.
And to test programs. It was great because they were really smart kids. And probably some of the editors learned things from the kids. But they would review things too, and they would, test the games, and it wasn't chaotic. everybody was like so committed and dedicated, and if we had been in the regular Scholastic offices, we never would have had people working all night and being as devoted as they were. It was pioneering.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very exciting.
Cool. So you mentioned some famous people who wrote for the magazine. Did they actually show up in the offices, or do you think they actually wrote, or did their people write?
No, it was really, a lot of times it wasn't that they wrote as much as they were interviewed about their use of the technology.
Sure.
But George Booth actually picked up a computer for the first time and would come to the office and create his cartoons.
Awesome.
He'd do them by hand for the New Yorker, and then he'd come to our office, and sometimes, as I said, with his wife and daughter, and he'd sit down and sit in the art department and work with the computer. He was a great guy. But then other times it was people like Herbie Hancock did not come to the office. I think Steve Case came to the office. Bill Gates' wife came to the office when she was not Bill Gates' wife. And we became friends with, a lot of people. There were a lot of the PR people, and I think I mentioned you would go to a party and it was everybody talked to everybody. I could have a conversation with Bill Gates. And everybody was into the computer. It wasn't about buying the business per se. There were some people who certainly were in it for making money, and they did. But a lot of them, started in their garage or their basement, and they just loved the technology.
So you said Steve Case came to the office and personally demonstrated America Online before it was called America Online, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Bernadette reminded me of that. I don't think I was even at the meeting. And then, people from Microsoft would come. We'd all go out to dinner.
You were thinking about doing other possible magazines, such as Atom Family Computing for the Coleco Atom, I assume.
Right. It was when there were, how many different computers, and we thought of doing that. And then when IBM came into the field, it radically changed. They began to use it for business, and they began to understand the power of the computer, and that the 64K did not seem so unsurmountable anymore. The little computers went away, the ones that we were making Christmas trees for.
Right. So at some point, family computing, how do I won't even try to say this nicely. It
evolved.
It evolved. It started off as a fun computer magazine for families, for parents and for kids. And then the computer landscape changed and IBM started taking over, and then family computing started switching to be...
Well, there was another thing.
Yeah.
What happened to really give a boost to the use of the computer was the cutbacks in business and layoffs. So people had the power that they had in their office potentially in their home, and they could function independently, start their own businesses, and they did. And that's when the magazine migrated to being family and home office computing, because there was this growing audience of people who had home offices, and they needed help. Some of them, if they had expertise in one area, needed help in another. So they may have been able to apply the technology, but they may not have known how to run a business because that wasn't their responsibility before.
Sure.
So we had to help them in terms of finance and promotion and all the other aspects of having a business. And then we had a big conference in California, and we got Alvin Toffler to be the speaker.
Hmm.
And that was a big breakthrough, too. And he really understood the power of the computer. So he and his wife, Heidi, I think was her name, they spoke, and it was very well received and very well attended. And it also helped to legitimize us.
Sure.
So it was exciting. I remember we had this big meeting at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel, and it legitimized us.
I think one of the most visible parts of being the editor-in-chief is writing the letter from the editor at the front of every issue. How did you decide what to talk about, and how much effort was it coming up with the topic and actually doing it? And then you also mentioned feedback from people. Were you hearing from kids? Were you hearing from the parents who
Yes, and I heard from editors, friends, people I had worked with in print, that I was surprised. A few people would say, I read your editorial every month, and I was shocked. It was intuitive, it was like waiting for inspiration, or there was something that was in the issue that would strike a note. And I remember it might have been the first one where I talked about how, I think it was my grandfather who called the car the machine.
Mm-hmm.
That when we had this change in technology and we didn't know how to identify it, we often referred to it as the machine, and that's how people at first referred to computers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, they were like, I would just rack my memory. Brain, I don't know how much of a brain I have, but, I would try to make a connection, which I think is what the magazine was all about, making a connection between the worlds of the world that we knew and then the world we were going into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then how those things connected.
Yeah, like a bridging the old and the new.
Yeah.
You wrote,
and a lot of free association.
Mm-hmm. You wrote, if Martians had landed on Earth and tried to discover what Earthlings do, based on conversation with my grandfather, they would never have learned about the automobile. The word did not exist in the old man's vocabulary. Instead, sitting in his garage was the machine, which he understood not at all, but which he greatly appreciated for somehow miraculously moving him and his friends and family wherever and whenever they wanted to go. The generations that followed him never questioned being automatically mobile, and the machine became the automobile, which became the car, which became brand or model specific as ownership in a single family household multiplied, and one car had to be easily distinguished from the others. And you go on to talk about
wrote that?
You wrote that. Yeah.
But that is what I was saying to you anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It was fun. I think that's probably the most important thing. When you're on the threshold of something new and you're able to make a discovery, I mean, what could be more fun than that?
Absolutely.
That it's not the same old, that you don't know where you're going. There aren't very many people who have the opportunity to be a pioneer and to start something new and exciting, and to do it without, if you do it within a large corporation, to do it without any interference, but to be able to really, just as our the parents didn't have experience with the computers, the company didn't either.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to really forge a path for ourselves, and it was very exciting, and it added something to the company as well. So, I would think that independence, to be able to be in a large corporation and to have the protection of a large corporation, but to be able to function like a startup, a newbie, without the constraints. It was very rare, but nobody knew what we were doing.
But you figured it out.
Yeah, but I mean the corporation, the people, because we were in a separate building.
Mm-hmm.
It was very rare that we were supervised or looked over.
It's probably for the best, though. I mean,
a lot.
you didn't have a bunch of suits who really didn't know. You thought you didn't know anything, but they probably super didn't know anything, and you probably didn't want them making decisions for you, right?
Right.
Well, tell me about how your time at Scholastic came to an end.
I reached retirement age, and the challenges of new ventures wasn't the same as it had been, and I had never not worked. So I was able to retire and have a different kind of life and to spend my time on the computer, and it's been very gratifying.
So how do you spend your time these days?
I'm on the computer.
All right.
All the time. I have my phone, like everybody else. I just got a new MacBook Pro, like 10 days or 2 weeks ago, which I'm sitting in front of. And I have that pad that I don't use. What in the hell is that called?
iPad or one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been charged in I don't know how long. I just pulled it off a shelf. And, everywhere you go, you've got it with you. You've got your phone. I was in a restaurant with this woman I mentioned the other night, Bernadette Gray, and her boyfriend. And, immediately there's something comes up you don't know, and someone pulls out their phone and looks it up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing what we're able to do.
Yeah, going back in the days of first Ataris and Apples, working at 300 baud, it's hard to imagine that, what those people would have thought about what we have today, a supercomputer in our pocket, always connected.
Oh, it's amazing. And the thing is, and I think this was something I had wanted to mention before, is, we use so little of the capability of the computer. I mean, they're so powerful, and most of us use it as a word processor, something to do with computing, calculating, stuff like that. But we don't use even a small percentage of its potential. So I wrote a few notes earlier. I went back and looked at the covers of the Family Computing.
Yeah.
One of the things I wrote is people knew it was the future but didn't know how it would affect them. They searched for reasons to buy. Oh, one of the things we did at Family Computing with all those different formats is we published programs that people would then key in.
Yes. Yeah, so you can have your Christmas tree on the screen or whatever.
Yes.
It was a lot of holiday greeting card type stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because that was something people would do. So, I wrote down that the early computers had limited memory, limited something that I can't read, limited imagination for how to use them, and the idea of 64K was more than anybody would ever need.
Yeah.
And basically the use that caught on was the replacement for the typewriter. Oh, and you know what else I think was really, see what you think of this. I think that Word was a real turning point.
Microsoft Word?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that really gave people a tool that everybody could use, understand. And then, of course, at the beginning, there was also the impact of the use of the school and in business. And when that happened, people began to see purpose, and that's when the real story begins.
Right. Yeah. Once we figured out it wasn't just for balancing your checkbook and or keeping track of your pills or something, right? Yeah,
so,
it was. Yeah.
And then I wrote down something with the downsizing of companies. Individuals had power, so that it's like with retirement. I think of the people who retired before me, and they didn't know what to do. It was like they didn't have computers. They just sat around, blah blah blah, and it changed life. I can't imagine anybody being bored. I don't have enough time, and I don't even know what I'm doing. I end up, I find myself, oh my God, it's 11 o'clock, and I haven't had dinner. I made salmon at 11 o'clock last night. And so anyway, it's certainly, as I said in that other thing about the car, I think those two things changed our lives more than anything.
Yeah. All right, I think this is my last question, Claudia. So this podcast is listened to people who...
Didn't even know it was a podcast.
It is a podcast. Yes.
Oh.
Normally at the very beginning of these interviews, I say, this is being recorded. You should assume people hear our entire conversation unless,
Well, we skipped that.
We skipped because you jumped straight in with, I met Jack Trammell once, and I was just like, okay, here we are, we're going. So
in my jumping.
We got none of the formalities. But yes, this is a podcast, and people are going to hear your voice, and except for,
Oh.
Yeah.
Dark.
Surprise. So this podcast is listened to by people, of varying ages, but I think many of them grew up reading Family Computing as kids. So now they are adults. Many of them have children of their own. So if you could send a message to the people who read your magazine back in the day, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that we were pioneers together. How exciting, that we were in at the beginning of a major change in the world, and that it was brave of them to have ventured into this new world. So I hope that they've grown with the industry and the computer, and that it's been rewarding to them and more than compensated for the investment of their time and money in terms of giving them another window to life.
Good answer. And thank you for your time and effort in putting together these great magazines, and they were fun to read and great to learn from.
And you know what? I loved every minute of it. It was a very exciting time. We would leave the office. Some people didn't leave the office. They worked through the night. But I had a cat who would only eat a certain cat food. I'd leave the office at 4 o'clock, and I couldn't find a deli that had the right cat food. I would in a cab and go from one to the other. And but it was so exciting. It was just so exciting. And I was able to bring people from lots of different places together, and it worked.
Awesome.
So I thank you.
Great. I think I have what I need. Thank you, Claudia.
You're very welcome.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.